Hey math fans, we're on completing the square number 1. Let's get started. Completing the square is a method of solving a quadratic equation which really involves trying to figure out what would be the perfect square trinomial that would factor to an end result like, let's say, for example, x plus 3 quantity squared. So let's work backwards on this problem. If we have x plus 3 quantity squared, it's really x plus 3 quantity times x plus 3 quantity. If we distribute, we end up getting x squared plus 3x, and that combines in the middle to 6x. And so our final solution for this is x squared plus 6x plus 9, which means that that is a perfect square trinomial. So if we were to factor that, we would end up back where we started at x plus 3 squared. The cool thing is that you can take the square root of x plus 3 squared and actually solve for x. And I will show you how to do that towards the end of the video. But for right now, I'm going to ask you a question like, what could we put for the c value that would make it a perfect square trinomial? What would go in there? So let's try an example. Here I have r squared minus 28r plus some value c, and I want to know what value of c would actually make this a perfect square trinomial. So in order to do that, there's a system involved, and hopefully you can remember that there's kind of a relationship between that value that you get in factored form, and I have it here, r plus the question mark, because we don't know what that value next to r is going to be, so that's why there's a question mark there. But wait a minute, I do know that, isn't that middle term actually double? I believe it's double, right? It's double this value we're going to get in the factored form. So the method we're going to do is we're going to divide by 2, and we get negative 14. Then we're going to square it. Okay, and then after you square it, you get a value of positive 196. What does that mean? Well, that means that if we were to have r squared minus 28r plus 196, that would actually factor into a perfect square. Here's some more practice. Take a few minutes, go through these, and then let's see if you got the right answer. So in the first example, we're going to take negative 15, divide it by 2. So you get negative 15 over 2, which is a fraction. And now we're going to square that fraction. Negative 15 over 2 squared is positive 225 over 4. So yes, you can get a fraction for c, and that would make this a perfect square trinomial. How about for the next one? Another fraction, right? Negative 13 divided by 2, but when you square it, you get 169 divided by 4 is your value for c to make this a perfect square trinomial. But the last one, though, when we divide negative 10 divided by 2, that's negative 5, and negative 5 squared is positive 25. So let's put this to good use here. Why even come up with the value of c? Well, what I want to do, like for example, I have m squared minus 20m plus 78 equals 0. I want to solve for m, and one of the methods is called completing the square. So usually we start off by making sure that the equation is equal to 0, which this one is, but it's really not a big deal for completing the square because our first move is actually going to be to make room for that value of c. So what I've done here is I have subtracted 78 and I put a question mark there, and that's what we've been practicing so far. What would go there to make it a perfect square trinomial? Well, let's see here. Negative 20 divided by 2 would be negative 10. And then we need to square it. That value we're going to add to both sides is negative 10 squared. And we have to add the same thing to both sides to keep it balanced. So negative 10 is actually going to be what it's going to factor into. So I'm not even going to simplify the left-hand side. I could make it positive 100, but then I would just end up factoring it anyway. and we get quantity of m minus 10 times the quantity of m minus 10. On the right side, though, you should multiply it and simplify it. You get negative 78 plus 100, keep simplifying, and you get quantity of m minus 10 squared, a perfect square on the left, equals 22. Now we can solve for m by taking the square root of both sides. Now, when you take the square root of the right side, you want to make sure that it's plus or minus. Because remember, when you take the square root of a number, you're asking yourself what number, when you multiply it times itself, will give you the number inside the radical. And it could be a negative number as well, a positive or a negative. So we have m minus 10 is equal to plus or minus radical 22. Add 10 to both sides. And that's actually your answer. Well, actually, there's two answers. There's two solutions. Do you see them? One of the answers is 10 plus radical 22. The other is 10 minus radical 22. And if you punch those answers into your calculator, you get around 14.69 and around 5.31. Both of those are values for m that would make the entire equation equal to 0. Those are both solutions. Those would be the x-intercepts if you were to graph this. And that's going to do it for this section. We'll see you in class.